All right. Hey everyone, my name is Tim Williams and I'm joined with me. No, I'm not joined.
You're joined with me.
Yeah, that's my co-founder. And today we are joined with a... Why do I keep saying joined? Jenine Colmore-Williams is joining us today. She is doing some fascinating things in the software space, but specifically for the New Zealand economy to do with compliant laundering. When I spoke to her earlier, I didn't really have an idea of the effects of money laundering, what it has on the New Zealand economy, but it's actually devastating. And she's a change initiator. She's wanting to do something about this issue. And so we had a chat to her about her business and what she's doing. So,
Bro, it's like real life movie stuff.
Actual real life movie stuff.
It's like Ozark.
But well, it's exactly like Ozark. So before we tell the whole story, let's jump straight into it and listen to the story from Jenine herself. So without further ado, here's some of the conversation we had with Jenine earlier today. Jenine, it's so great to have you on the show. I believe you're calling us from the beautiful Waiheke Island, is that right?
I am, and actually as if I pop my head over my screen, I'm looking out over at the Coromandels, and it's a beautiful day.
Oh, lovely. I think it's definitely one thing we've been so blessed with here in New Zealand is I definitely know here in Nelson we've just had amazing weather, just incredible weather during this lockdown period.
Oh, absolutely. It makes a huge difference when you've got kids in the house and you're able to get them outside. It's just, and being on Waiheke, we've got the ability to go for comfortable walks and not being too concerned about the social distancing piece because we've got so much space. It's great.
Yeah. Hey, look, it was awesome to be able to chat with you just the other day and also reading through your website to get a bit more about what you're doing. And obviously one thing that we're very much focused on through creating not only LumEd, but also this LumEd resources to be able to add value to people in their world. And having to listen to your story, it was so fascinating. I think even along the journey, you've been able to add value not only to the people you've worked with, but what you're definitely doing now is adding value to the greater economy and resourcing businesses to essentially limit the money laundering and fraud. So can you just give us a brief overview about what Dimension GRC is all about?
Okay. Dimension GRC was born 2.5 years ago. I had returned back from the UK, having been there for 20 odd years, came back to New Zealand. And when you're out of your country for so long, you come back into it, you really fall back in love with the country and the culture and all of those good things. And I realized that I'd been in the corporate world for a long time and it's time for me to branch out. I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, something for myself. Never thought it would be compliance, but that was part of the journey. So did a number of roles at IBM and Vodafone and Westpac and so forth. And my old role was connecting people with purpose and bringing their whole selves to work. That was what my passion was about. So when I was starting to think about actually what do I want to do as a business, I was working at Westpac and I became very aware of this whole anti-money laundering thing. And seriously, compliance can be the most driest thing in the world, right? If I'm at a dinner party and people get to sit next to me and say, hey, so what do you do? And I say, I'm in compliance. They're like, oh, okay. Not sitting next to, right? But, the more I understood about how it affects our communities, how it affects our economy, how it affects us globally, I actually became very passionate about it. And bringing together my experience in the tech world with IBM and Vodafone and then kind of overlaying that with the world in tier one banking, I thought, hang on a second, there's a really good opportunity to support small to medium-sized enterprises here in New Zealand with this thing called compliance and the understanding of this thing called anti-money laundering. Because outside of Ozark, who's been my brand savior, right? Because if I tell people about Ozark, they instantly understand what I do then.
Yeah.
So outside of stories like that, people really don't understand how it affects us and how can I start up a business, How can I add value to what these businesses are doing, but also allow them to comply with this really boring thing and a really complex thing called anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism legislation?
Yeah, well.
So the journey started off with what I want to do for compliance is what Xero did for accounting. I want to take the complexity of it. I want to wrap a nice software as a service around it. I made some assumptions around what that could look like. I went out to market and I tested it, and we started designing, and it was really exciting. And then I realized something. One of the assumptions that I made is that people would want this. Well, they don't really, because they didn't understand what money laundering through the lens of New Zealand meant. So my role became, it kind of moved off being the entrepreneur and the designer of a piece of sexy software to actually, how do I now start telling the story? How do I communicate to people? How do I support them in their understanding so that the penny drops and they get that? And then how do we embed a culture of compliance so people understand why they're doing what they're doing? So that's a little bit of a synopsis on why we came about and why we are where we are now. It's been an awesome journey. It's been really, really exciting.
Could I just ask a question purely from an outsider's point of view? Could we break down what money laundering is and maybe explain the significance of your company within the New Zealand context? Because I guess from my point of view, and perhaps a lot of people watching, they're thinking, oh, it feels like this really elusive, far off thing. I've got nothing to do with it. I'll never launder money. Could you break that down and explain what it is?
Yeah, for sure. And that's a really good place to start. So money laundering is basically the taking of funds that have been acquired through criminal activity and cleaning it and putting it into a banking or a financial environment that allows you to use it in any way you see fit as a criminal. So how does that affect New Zealand? So the thing about money laundering is it's not like armed robbery or murder, right, where the action is understood, the victim is there, and how you manage that process is understood. And money laundering kind of seeps into our communities. It's where it starts off at the street level, where you've got street drugs being sold, whether it's a tinny under a bridge or whatever the case may be. There's cash accumulating, and when these criminals are doing a really good job, they accumulate a lot of cash. And the financial systems globally have locked down your ability to rock into the ASB and deposit 10 grand in cash, because people have identified that actually not many jobs allow you to get 10 grand in cash that are legitimate jobs. And if you're going to be paying tax, then technically that money should have been coming through the financial system, right? So it's happening, but it's an undercurrent. It's not obvious. It's not like any other crime. And so to your point, that's why a lot of New Zealanders probably don't see it. Where we have seen it is pretty much everyone's heard of the Panama Papers, but we had 11,000 trust funds opened up in New Zealand by foreign nationals who were laundering money through our country through trust funds. Recently, we had very much an Ozarky type story. We had the quiet accountant down in Tauranga who was laundering hundreds of thousands of dollars for the Comancheros. Now, the Comancheros are an Australian-based gang that was exported back to New Zealand. Thank you, Australia. But they're very, very well funded. The Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, the largest cartel, finances these guys. And so not only are they financed by them, but they're also educated by them. And these guys are now in our country doing what they do here. So if we're going to protect our communities, if we're going to protect our businesses, if we're going to protect our economy, we really need to understand this. So Dimension GRC has become, yes, as software as a service, great, but we're also much more about the conversation now and educating people around what that means.
Well, one thing that you mentioned earlier on our phone call is just the effect that money laundering actually has in New Zealand. I was staggered at what essentially what us New Zealanders' economy is missing out on due to money laundering. Can you sort of break that down in terms of if we could put a stop to this, what it actually means for us as a nation.
Absolutely. So the last testing of this was done by Andrew Little, where he wanted to understand exactly how much is laundered. And I mentioned earlier that it's a crime it's not seen. So in understanding how much is kind of filtered out of our economy, the figure was a conservative one. It's $1.35 billion a year. And that goes through money laundering, fraud, tax evasion. So that is money that could be putting nurses in hospitals, teachers in classrooms, policemen on the street. It could be helping Pharmac fund new cancer drugs. It could be doing so many more things. But it's not. It's taken from us and it's taken abroad. Money laundering is what's called a transnational crime. It's global. So that is the effect that it's having on our economy, is it's taking that much money out that could be better served, supporting various parts of our country.
Yeah, it's staggering. I had no idea that it was, at that sort of level, and what sort of effects, especially the good that could be coming out of it if this was stopped.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. There's a lot more good stuff to come, so stay tuned. But we just wanted to let you know that you can check out Janine's business, Dimensions GRC, with the link below. All the details are there. We would love it if you explored those pages, got to know her business a little bit more and how it could be relevant to your world. But without further ado, let's get back to the convo.
So one thing I'd love to know, it's definitely I guess you could say quite a niche industry that you're in. What was the process to getting there? Did you experience this firsthand, or was it that you fell into a market where you saw this? You touched on that earlier with working through IBM and part of your journey, but was it like a blaring light on this situation that you I have to stop this? Or was it, no, I could come up with a solution to, prevent this? How'd you get there?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a combination of all of that, actually. So when I was living in London, I lived next door to an elderly woman who was approached by a friend of the family, and they asked if she could use her foreign bank account, multi-currency account, so you can have an English account, you can have an American dollar account, whatever. So they asked her if she would be prepared to move some money to the US for them, and that they would kind of pay the bank fees for her. And she, of course, naively said, absolutely, just deposit into my account. I'll use my US foreign account to do that for you. And she found out that what she had actually been was a money mule, and that money was moving illicit funds out of the UK into the US. And she was mortified, absolutely mortified. So this is an elderly woman that had gone through the wars in England. She had listened to the planes fly over, and now she's done something to undermine, the financial structure of the community. So she was really upset about that. And that's kind of the first time it became apparent to me. But to the point where the decision of actually tipping in and selling my house and sitting down with the children and telling them what I was doing with our savings, yes, a business opportunity, but it's also New Zealand's backbone is the small to medium-sized business, right? And if we're going to protect that, and if we're going to if they're going to continue adding value to our economy, and we're going to support them, then I saw the opportunity to do that. I know that tier one banks that I have worked for have really struggled in this space. It's complex. So how do we take technology, process, and all of those things and wrap them up into a size that is digestible by a small to medium-sized enterprise? So there's a lot of passion, and there's obviously a business, and I need to make money off that business, but I am very passion-driven.
It's amazing. What are some maybe three really practical things that people like us in our situation who I guess would see ourselves as wanting to contribute and wanting to help but not knowing how? What are some really practical things that we can put in place within our own businesses to ensure that we're not caught up within this, or that we can actually help be part of the solution, not the problem?
Absolutely, it's a good question. So I think specifically the industry you're in, you're fantastic communicators, right? And you're passionate about how do we add value. And I think the biggest thing in New Zealand is the education. It's the story that we tell. It's the story we socialise. You both said that you were unaware of the effect that it's having in the economy when most people are in that environment. So I think first and foremost, it's having the discussion and creating awareness around it. There's the obvious ones of making the types of money laundering and how it can come about, that education available to people. So my example of money muling, it happens a lot in our universities, especially for those foreign students who do have access to multi-currency accounts, where they're willingly or not going through that process. So money muling is a big one. In COVID-19, what we're seeing is a bunch of businesses who really are focused on continuity and focused on getting things set up for their employees in a remote environment. What's happening is the focus is coming off compliance as a result of that. And we understand that, but more than ever now, there needs to be an increased vigilance around how the behaviour of people and what they're doing with their money could potentially fall into the money laundering realm. So we saw in lockdown, people knee-jerk reacting, picking up all of their funds and repatriating it out of New Zealand for fear that our economy was going to melt down, they were going to lose their savings. Don't do that. It's, so there's a number of small things, and it's all about awareness, really it is. When I'm dealing with businesses, it's a lot bigger, but if we're talking about everyday New Zealanders, it's about awareness. We all know not to buy drugs, it's illegal. Right? We know that human trafficking is disgusting, but it's more, the smaller things that we have to be aware of, and it's just educating people on that.
So can you talked about that New Zealand's backbone is the small to medium businesses. This product that you have, is that the sort of target market that you've created this for? Who is your clientele to use this product?
Right, good question. So the product is specifically designed for small to medium-sized enterprises. So the vision I had was to take the access to data that the big tier one banks have and can afford and make that available to small to medium-sized enterprises in a solution that was really simple but very elegant to use. So the analogy I use is what Xero did for accounting, we've done for compliance. So we find all the needles in the haystack for the small to medium-sized business owner. They don't have to understand what they have to do next. It's all there in front of them. They don't have to understand where in the onboarding process they are with a customer. We've done that for them. They've got a holistic system that it doesn't matter if your staff are working remotely or whether they're in the office, you have full visibility of what they're doing. You know where the risk in your business sits. It's just very clear and very simple to use. But the back end of it is very complex. So it's taken the complexity and made it very simple. So very targeted at the small to medium-sized enterprise and giving them access to the data that big tier one banks have. An example of that would be if you're a lawyer or an accountant and you're onboarding a new customer and that new customer has got a Chinese identity card, for example, or a UK passport, how do they electronically verify that? For banks, it's very easy. So we've brought that functionality to the small to medium-sized business owner so they can do things with confidence in the same way that tier one banks do.
We really hope that the content that we're bringing is insightful and informative to you, but inspiring you to be able to continue to do business really well. So if you know someone who might benefit from these podcasts, or specifically this one, please tell them about it. If Dimensions GRC is a software product or a service that might be able to help yourself as a business or someone else that you may know, please share it and let's start creating some change within the business space.
I don't know if I'm going off track here, Tim. You can rein me in if we get down a rabbit hole, but I'd love to I guess the last couple of questions, but I'd really love to pick your brains in terms of your entrepreneurial spirit. You're a business leader. You are an innovator. I just want to know, I guess, your thought process through this whole last 4 weeks of lockdown, and obviously it's affected everyone in the country, your businesses included. But how have you processed the last 4 weeks? This is, very different, very off track to what we've just been talking about. Okay. But what sort of things are you thinking about moving into level 3, level 2, and hopefully back into reality very soon? Let's hope a month.
Yeah.
How are you processing managing your business through this journey? Because a lot of our audience and listeners, they are small to medium business owners like ourselves. We've just got 6 of us in our company, and Tim and I both on the side just run a separate wedding photography and videography business, very kind of small niche markets.
Yes.
Do you have any encouragement or thoughts around the mindset of people moving into this new era almost within the country?
Yeah. So for me, it's, when you're pre-COVID, you've got a small business, you're out there, you're dealing with customers, and you're busy. This concept of busy, that we always have to be busy, busy, busy. What COVID's done for me as a business owner is actually that fanaticism stopped. And it made me think, oh my goodness, okay, now I've actually got some time to reflect on what I'm doing, reflect on how I'm doing it, how could I do it better. But then that thinking process became a lot deeper and wider. And what I mean by that is actually the solution is adding value. Okay, I know I've got to educate and support and guide. That adds value. But now that I've got time to think about this, how else can I shape value for the customer? And that big passion piece for me about New Zealand, protecting communities and borders, what does that actually look like? What do I mean when I say that? So what it's done for me is it's given me time to think and reframe my vision. Because when you're realizing your vision and you're in your state of busyness, sometimes you can lose your way a little bit because you get caught up in things. So if there's a silver lining for me as a business owner, as an innovator, is actually getting time to think about what that means. So for me now is an opportunity, because AML has been in New Zealand since 2013 for phase 1 and since 2018 for phase 2. So it's for those reporting entities that have to comply, the conversation has to now become richer. Okay, we can't keep spanking them, telling them that they have to do this legislative thing, otherwise a regulator's going to come and tell you off, and you really run the risk of losing your business if you're fined. That's kind of not a great narrative, right? So what is the extra value that we can have? So it's bringing together people who have equal passion, people in the corporate arena, people in digital services, people that can think outside the square box and come together and think about that value piece. And that's why I was so attracted to working with the two of you, because that was what your core focus was how do we add value. So for me, the value is how do we reframe a conversation? Yes, you have to do something because the law says you have to. But what's another way of looking at this? How can we take what you do with your operations and dealing with your customers? You're collecting a whole lot of data. How can we get that data to tell a story so that you can then look at the customer and go, actually, now that I've got all this data about them, what I could do is upsell or cross-sell in this space, because actually what this customer is doing could be benefited if they had this service. And pre this legislation, you didn't have that much knowledge of your customer. You didn't acquire that much information. But now you can look at the products and services you offer and say, well, actually, are they out of date? Because my customer's a lot more sophisticated. Or there is a customer group that I haven't thought of approaching with this product, and now I know that I can test that assumption based on the story that the data is telling me. So now I'm getting extremely excited about taking what I've done and the energy and the emphasis that we've put in the New Zealand economy, and then taking that conversation further. So yes, compliance, you don't want to sit next to me at a dinner table because it's going to be boring, but how do we bring it into something more exciting? How do we continue to add value? So in answer to your question, I'm sorry I'm going a long way about it, but it's actually how do you reframe, revisit and reconnect with your vision and your passion. So that's what I've got out of it. So for me...
That's so great. I love that.
Yeah, for me, a passion is something that you grow. You wake up with the vision, you go to sleep with the vision moves with you, and the vision is also something you can tap into in those days where things are tough, and it allows you to move forward. Hold on to that. So that's what I've got out of this.
Hey, look, we've absolutely loved having you part of the show, and I think your story is just so fascinating. But one thing that I feel very inspired about is the fact that you're a change initiator. You're wanting to create change for the greater good, in New Zealand, for the economy, and you took the step. You went out there and you're doing something about it. So I want to commend you on what you're doing, and it's a really good thing. And I really hope that through what you're doing, we can see more teachers out there, and teachers, have a pay rise, because I think they need to be paid much more than what they're doing. We can see more nurses out there, and everything that you're doing should only have a good outcome. So well done, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I very much appreciate it. Cheers.
Before we do totally sign off, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to add that we may not have talked about, but something that you might be able to speak in to encourage people?
Yes, actually, I think it probably goes to the question that you asked earlier around what I've learned out of this period. And I think one thing that I would like to say to all of those business owners out there is put your hand up. Ask for help. New Zealanders are very proud people, and I think now is the time to reach out if you're wanting to test assumptions on a business idea. If you're struggling, if you need help, put your hand up. There is a lot of people out there, very, very clever people out there that are willing to help right now. And it's a great opportunity to take advantage of that, because when lockdown's lifted and we all go back to whatever normal looks like, they're going to go back into the fanaticism of running their own businesses. So now is an opportunity for New Zealand to really come together, really help and support and nurture each other. So if you've got a vision, if you've got a dream, or if you're struggling with anything, put your hand up. There's heaps of people out there that are prepared to help. So that would be my last message, I think.
There are some amazing business opportunities out there, even though it might look dark and shady at the moment coming out of lockdown. There definitely are some opportunities for you to grab hold of. So I hope these conversations have been encouraging. If nothing more, hopefully it just inspires you to think differently, to think bigger, and to think about a bright future that we can all walk into together as a New Zealand business community.
There's a lot of business owners and business coaches and even accountants that the government is resourcing to be able to help small businesses. So if you jump back a couple of episodes to our interview with Greg Hay, there's a lot of information there about what the government is doing to help small businesses. But take a step of faith and get on there, and if you have a dream, go fulfill it. Now's a great time to take a step and just launch into something.
We've got lots more in store, so we can't wait to share more conversations with you from other inspiring people within the New Zealand business community. If you're new to this, LumEd is Lumiere Education, and it's an educational branch that our company Lumiere has developed because we really just want to give back to the business community and provide resources and education to inspire you and encourage you within the season that we're living in. So for now, stay safe everybody, and we'll see you in the next episode. My name's Joshua Kirk. That is Tim Williams. We'll see you in the next one.